Set. Got like a studio, sorta, kinda. And lighting! That is all. On with the regular scheduled program.
I don't know what the fuck's going on.
That dog. What the fuck are you doing in England?
Did I not mention that part?
But we'll get there.
This has been pointless.
I'm back. Hello.
Today I've got something a little different than last time. Instead of going over a bunch of different series with some loose connecting threads sort of tying them together, I'm going to be talking about one specific series that I find individually very fascinating to talk about. I don't really know how to introduce this topic, so let's just get into it. This is a Chinese shoujo manhua I read in, high school. And it fucking goes places. Also, shoujo's a Japanese term, so I should probably use the corresponding Chinese term, but I don't know it. But anyway, this is basically a female-centric teen love comic about an awkward, nerdy teenage girl from our present day going back in time and smooching Arthur, as well as gaining the interest of several handsome knights along the way. But the whole thing is put through several layers of interpretation and artistic impression to the point that I cannot pinpoint where the changes fucking occurred. I took a year of Chinese in undergrad, but I wasn't very good at pronunciation then, and I've forgotten what little I did know, but here's my best attempts. The manhwa is called Qíshì huànxiǎng Ye. This guy is named Qi1, and the main character is called Lin. Though, speaking casually, I will probably just call her Lin. I'm sorry I'm white. As for an English translation of the title, Google suggests Knight Fantasy Knight, which is what the fan translators use. But I've also seen Knights, Fantasy Knight, Knight Fantastic Knight, Fantasy Knight, and even Fantansy Knight. That was probably a typo, but it does feature on the author's very own Wikipedia page, which we will get back to. And yes, I will be focusing on the fan translation by Mystic Crescent Scans because it is, as far as I'm aware, the only translation into English. So if any of you wish to go forth and check it out for yourselves, this is what you'll be reading. To be clear, I will be poking fun of and correcting this translation, but I by no means wish to make fun of or undermine the efforts of the fan translators. As far as I can tell, they did this for free, just because they fucking wanted to. And without their work, I would have never even known about these series, let alone read it and extracted so much enjoyment from it. So, nothing but gratitude for those guys. It is pretty fucking rough, though. The first 3 chapters set up the basic premise. Lin here is a catastrophically unlucky high school girl who has recently started at a new school. She makes friends with Guo Ting, a very rambunctious, confident girl who shows her the ins and outs of her new school life. She makes a name for herself by getting into trouble on the very first day of school, meets the school bully D, and encounters Qi1, a very popular boy at school with the nickname the Third Prince, who puts on a very gentlemanly, princely act in front of everyone else, but is very mean to Lin specifically in secret. There is no first or second prince. So we're setting up a pretty standard school life drama, and then immediately dropping it. Forget everything I just told you. It's not fucking relevant. Well, Qi1 will eventually be relevant, but not for this. We'll get there. We also set up a bit of a character arc for Lin, where she is very cowardly, hates that about herself, and wants to change but can't. Which segues terribly into the start of the actual plot. Petty theft. Lynn accidentally steals a video game from a store, puts it into her computer, and gets sucked into the game world based on Arthurian legend. Stock Isekai plot hook 23B. From 2009. The first character she meets there is Merlin, depicted here as a blue-haired pretty boy, who tells her how the game works. She needs to help Arthur ascend to the throne and find the Holy Grail. Where's Arthur? Candy. He's Candy. The better question is, how old is Arthur? 7. He's 7. He's the male lead, by the way. Before Lynn can go save him, though, she first has to protect a lion from a bunch of human-faced flies using a magical fly swatter whose activation chant is, I hit, I hit, I hit, I hit. This is never brought up again. She names the lion Flower. So she saves Arthur, and by that I mean Merlin does most of the work, and it turns out Arthur's a little shit. You know, like most 7-year-olds. Through the next couple of chapters, Lynn is pretty frantically trying to get back to her own world. In most isekai, this would be a long, drawn-out affair that would take place over most of the series. But here, there's actually a pretty straightforward method that Merlin fills her in on in their very first conversation. Eating an egg. An egg. Like a chicken egg. To escape the video game and go back to her own world, all she has to do is eat an egg. And no, I don't know why. It's never explained. But that should be easy, right? You just get a fucking egg. It's fucking medieval times. There's chickens all over the goddamn place. But no! There are chickens at the castle they're staying in, but no eggs. Why? Well, first, Arthur says the chickens here lost the ability to produce eggs, like it's just some weird phenomenon. But she keeps searching for eggs for some reason until Merlin fills her in that all the chickens are roosters, which is a different explanation from before. She still goes to look for eggs anyway, until Arthur comes by with a basket of eggs he had a butler go and get from somewhere else. At which point, Lynn goes, "Oh, sweet. So she's back in her own world. But Lynn quickly discovers that she's kind of cursed, because also eating eggs brings her back to the game world. Also, she ate a raw egg that first time, but it doesn't need to be that. Like, she eats a hard-boiled egg later and that works. Omelets work, egg pudding works, cake works. Literally anything with eggs in it will work. Also, when she gets back to her world, no time has passed at all. But when she accidentally goes back into the game world, 10 years have passed. So Arthur's 18 now, which makes this future relationship not creepy. Said, probably too many people involved. Some time passes with Lynn in the game world, during which she, Arthur, and Kai, a knight who's also around, do some training, which I only bring up because Lynn is given a special bow by Merlin. She is told that right now she can only use normal arrows, but eventually she'll be able to use moon arrows, which have the effect of, whenever an enemy is shot by the moon arrow, they become a star, which is either a poetic way of saying that they die, or Merlin just handed a high school girl a literally apocalyptic weapon. So what's up with that? Well, 100 chapters later, during a tense moment in Siberia, we'll get there, Lin shoots a glowing blue arrow at a soldier, at which point an ethereal blue flame with a big letter I on it, presumably a Roman numeral 1, but who the fuck knows, exits his body, floats on over to Lin, and is absorbed into her. And if that didn't answer your question, we're in the same boat. It's never brought up again. I'm skipping a lot of unimportant stuff around here, but the next important bit, following some mild harassment from Arthur, Lin goes down into the wine cellar and encounters a beautiful dark-haired man on the verge of death on the floor. He tries to kill her, but succumbs to his wounds before he can, actually stab her. Lin helps him recover, which I would make fun of, but sometimes it just be like that, Anyway, once he comes to, he says, "I'm not a bad guy. You'll regret helping me someday." Names himself Lucifer, and then fucks off. So, mixed messages. Someone Lin helped out earlier offers her some egg pudding, commenting that it's not easy for our chickens to produce eggs. Anyway, Lin obviously eats the pudding and goes back home against Arthur's very vocal wishes. While Lin's back in her world, she gets involved in a little more generic school drama, is avoiding eggs like the devil, and finishes up her character arc about bravery. In chapter 32 of 168. Anyway, a jealous schoolgirl throws an egg at her and she goes back to the game world. And I mean, fuck! Last time a day in her world turned into 10 years in the game world, and it's been like a week since she came back this time. So Arthur's gonna be an old, it's been a month. That first time was just them really not wanting her to fuck a child. He could have just not been a child from the start. Being based on Arthurian legend, some established myths and stories find their way into Night Fantasy Night, but remixed a bit. For example, they do their own version of the Green Knight. If you're unfamiliar with the story of Gawain and the Green Knight, you can watch this video from Overly Sarcastic Productions. I was gonna do my own quick recap, but it was very clunky and didn't actually help anything. So, early on in Night Fantasy Night, Lin and Arthur make their way to a lake in search of a castle with a certain goal in mind that I will not reveal now for the sake of dramatic reveal. Gawain will not feature in this retelling of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. There, they encounter the Green Knight, who says, "Hey! Cut off my head! If I die, I'll tell you where the castle is! But if I live, I'll cut you 3 times!" Lin says the guy's clearly an idiot, but then the Green Knight does his best Moses impression, and then Lin's concerned because the guy may know about martial arts. Ah, hey, the Wikipedia article about karate. I wasn't here. Arthur accepts the challenge and cuts off the Green Knight's head. At which point, the Green Knight picks up his head and points them in the direction of the castle of the Earl and Countess of Austin. Anyway, the Green Knight will show up in 3 days, but in the meantime, the Earl starts a sort of bargain with Arthur, where every day the Earl will go out hunting, and he will give Arthur whatever he catches in exchange for Arthur giving him whatever he gets that day. Then, while the Earl is gone, the Countess tries to seduce Arthur, who stoically refuses, but she leverages the customs of knighthood to at least kiss him on the cheek. Arthur's not a knight yet, by the way. Arthur then kisses the Earl on the cheek to keep their bargain, and the same repeats the next day. On the third day, the Countess tries to give Arthur her girdle. To be clear to anyone familiar with the original, the girdle is not magical in any way. It's just a thing, apparently, where girls make girdles and give them to guys they're interested in. Arthur refuses on the grounds that he'll only accept a girdle from the woman he loves. The Earl comes back and Arthur tells him he has nothing to give. The Earl then tells Arthur that the Green Knight is waiting for him in the garden. Arthur stands there stoically and takes the first 2 strikes completely unscathed. The third swing only cuts him a little on the other shoulder. I'm still not sure what's up with that. But it turns out that this was a test. The first 2 swings did nothing because he honestly returned the kisses. And the third swing only hurt him a little because Lynn received the girdle in Arthur's stead behind his back, and he didn't then give the girdle he didn't know he had to the Earl. Also, the castle they were in was actually the castle in the lake they were looking for all this time. The Earl was actually a fairy of that lake, and the Countess was actually the Green Knight, who is also Lancelot. And that's how Lancelot joins the party. Now, you may have a few questions about this, such as, can Lancelot use illusions? Can Lancelot survive mortal wounds? Is Lancelot fey? Does Lancelot have a personality? The answer to all of these questions is, I don't know. Seemingly not. There's even a point later on where Lynn is talking with Lancelot and is like, hey, don't you have this personality trait based on your backstory? And he's just sort of like, no, not really. Also, yes, this does mean Lancelot was the one trying to seduce Arthur and kissing him on the cheek. Do with that what you will. Quick tangent. Early on, Lynn and the Countess, whom we now know to be Lancelot, have an unimportant conversation about a specific flower in the castle's garden. And they call this flower Lonicera japonica thumb. Consistently. That is the scientific name for the Japanese honeysuckle. Or rather, Lonicera japonica is the scientific name. That thumb bit is the authority, something that I've only just learned about, and that refers to Carl Peter Thunberg, the first, European, to describe the species in an official text. So, not only are Lynn and Lancelot in casual conversation using the full scientific name of this flower, they are also citing their fucking sources. Also, that is not a honeysuckle. Going to the original Chinese, they're supposed to be talking about Anemone cathayensis, an entirely different plant. Anyway, Lynn goes back to her own world for a little bit, gets involved in some generic school drama with Qi, and then willingly goes back to the game world in order to see Arthur's knighthood ceremony. I don't know how she knew she'd be back in time, considering just how different the last 2 time skips were, but hey. Regardless, the gang starts preparing for the king to show up to officially knight Arthur when a dog Lynn adopted, by scamming the owner, runs off into a bunch of mud. As Lin is cleaning the dog up, the dog turns into a naked little boy. Yeah, likely story, bud. The post-canid, pre-decency little boy says there's no time to explain, the king is in danger, and then runs off before turning back into a dog and then running off. And yeah, Lin follows the dog and foils the bad guy's plot, but that's not the important point here. Why dog become child? Why child not clothed? Why child no danger? Why dog have human eyes?
Rice. Fuck you, Rice. Fuck you. You fucked up my recording. All I can hear in the fucking background just... Fuck you.
The answer to these questions and more will not feature in this video because I don't know them. This is never brought up again. Well, we'll get there. Some time passes. Guinevere finally shows up at a party, and Lin has some angst about the fact that she is fated to marry Arthur according to the legend. Now, there are plenty of series that have this kind of issue, and they solve it in similar sorts of ways. These stories tend to really want to avoid having this play out where the audience could reasonably support the hero-heroine pairing, so they tend to use one of two strategies. One, the heroine is just not interested in the hero. Could be for a variety of reasons. They're not into romance, they like a different guy, or my favorite, they're a lesbian. Or two, the heroine is actually a villain, and so why the fuck would we root for her? But it's pretty obvious what's gonna happen here. I mean, Lancelot's right there! He's not doing... Guinevere shoots Lin with a gun. That technically happens much later on, but Guinevere is a catty bitch who tries to frame Lin for some petty drama. Works less as a punchline, even though it happens much sooner. Also, apparently some poet wrote a poem about Guinevere. So you know I gotta read that one out. She can control an eagle. She has a talent for all games, especially playing chess. She can chant all romantic poems. God grants her an alluring beauty and a mellow voice. God gives her the best of everything that any humans can ask for, so that she can become a flame to light the whole world. She's a perfect human being without any flaws. Whoever meets her would know the true meaning of the word beauty. Preach, sister! That was gross. Lucifer also gets his formal character introduction, and it turns out that he's the Pope's illegitimate child, and his name... So, for about 30 chapters in the translation, he is not named and is only referred to as the Duke of Gestalt, Lord Gestalt, or Dark Duke. Not the Dark Duke. Dark Duke. Then, out of nowhere, they just start calling him Duarte Rodriguez? Like that's been his name the whole time and everyone's known it? And then occasionally Dargus. And, to be clear, none of these seem to have any basis in historical figure or character in Arthurian legend. There is no Duchy of Gestalt. There is no character Gestalt. There is no Dark Duke or Dargus, and Googling Duarte Rodriguez only turns up the vice president of a Portuguese company whose translated description sounds like you asked ChatGPT to describe a company without describing what it is they do. So let's go to the original Chinese and see if we can get a bit more information. His name in Chinese is, best attempt, Duagesu. To be clear, Duagesu is also neither historical nor Arthurian. If you Google it, about all you'll find out is that it is almost the Chinese name for Trunks from Dragon Ball. Again, I don't speak the language, so my research can only go so far, but I'm pretty sure this is an original character, Do Not Steal. So it's understandable how Duagusu could become Dargis, if we infer an R sound about here, which may be well-founded. I don't speak the fucking language. For Duarte Rodriguez, well, I don't know where half of these syllables came from. And it's a weird name for an Italian, but it sounds like recognizably Western and is kinda nice. But if we're going back to the original Chinese, let's go back to that Duke of Gaston line and see what he's actually the Duke of. So we just bring up that original panel, and it's the same fucking characters. That was another attempt at translating his fucking name. By the way, this also happened to Gawain, who was introduced but not really relevant, being called the Marquis of High Timor, or the Marquis of Leste, both being attempts at translating his name. Timor-Leste is a nation near Indonesia whose Chinese name shares one of the characters in Gawain's Chinese name, and the other character in Gawain meaning high. So you kind of see how that happened. But this required far less investigation, because Gawain is a character from Arthurian legend. So I knew who the fuck he was. You may, like I did, extrapolate from here that Dark Duke is yet another attempt at translating his name, explaining why they don't use the, and it kind of has the same sort of sounds in there. No, that's an actual title. Long story short, I'll be calling him Duarte Rodriguez because fuck you. Anyway, then the king dies. They were expecting him to name Arthur his successor, but an evil lord guy was the only person present as the king was dying, and apparently he never sorted out the whole succession thing until his literal fucking deathbed. Regardless, they hear rumors of the sword in the stone that can only be pulled out by the rightful king of England, and prepare to send Arthur to it. But before that can happen, a plot from the evil lord switches Arthur's body with a cat. The only feasible method they have to actually undo this is with Medusa's mirror.
What the fuck are you doing in England?
Which is currently owned by Gawain. Hey, Gawain's relevance! The problem is that Gawain is not one of Arthur's knights yet. Also in this model, he's a pervert who wants to collect Lin because he's never met an Asian before. That's not even exaggeration. That is just a stated reason, basically. Anyway, Gawain doesn't want to give it up. Lancelot gets turned to stone. I don't notice a fucking difference. And Lin gets the mirror. Gawain finally agrees to help. Lancelot stays behind because he's a statue. Gawain tries to kiss Lin and accidentally kisses Cat Arthur. Regardless, they're not done yet. They need Cat Arthur and Arthur Cat to be reunited before the mirror can swap them again. Arthur Cat was already taken to where the sword is, and on the hike, they get attacked by some of the evil lord's men. Now that we're starting to meet some of the knights of the Round Table, let's go over something kind of interesting. These characters are actually from Arthurian legend, so their names are originally English, and we know what they are. But there was a bit of a linguistic game of telephone played, so we sometimes do a bit of work to figure out who's who. Some, like Arthur, Lancelot, and Gawain, are spot-on, no interpretation required. The rest, we've got to do some digging. For example, Kai is Arthur's childhood friend and almost like a brother to him. Going to the list of knights, we can quickly see that this is Sir Kay. Not that difficult. Then there's Terry. This one's more difficult, but looking through the list of knights, you can pretty quickly convince yourself it must be a nickname for Sir Tristan. Like, the Chinese had the first chunk of the name, and the translator didn't realize it was shortened. Like, you can see how Terry pops out of there. Checking the actual characters, there's an S sound at the end that probably should have tipped them off, but it's not too bad. Now that we've had some practice, let's test our skills on this knight named Parsifalcus. 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 Parsi space Farkas. Parsifal? Parsifal? Why is there a K? I mean, that works. And I can't imagine what else Pashifa would be. He's probably Percival? He's probably Percival. Anyway, while bringing Cat Arthur to the sword, Lynn meets Terry, who joins them in fending off Parsifalcus, who was hired by the evil lord to kill Lynn and Cat Arthur. Terry's personality is that he's a germaphobe, at least he has one, and Parsifalcus has a weird thing going on where he alternates between being good and evil every day. Or as the fan translators put it, bipolar. Also, Lynn straight up kills a man for the first time and has no qualms about that. Not super relevant, but goddamn. The party finally makes it to the church and they use the mirror to get Arthur back into his body so he can pull the sword. The evil lord tries one last trick to keep Arthur from pulling the sword, but Lynn uses some wind magic and passes it off as the will of God to get Arthur to be able to pull the sword. And it's fucking wild that it works, because these people know about magic. It's not some mystical thing they've never fucking heard of. It's a well-understood aspect of their life. Like, fucking Gawain had countermeasures in place for Lynn's wind magic when he gave her a date rape drug. Did I not mention that part? Anyway, Arthur becomes king, and it is precisely at this moment that Lynn realizes she is in love with him. And I could make a joke about that, but they were together for a long time in a very stressful situation, and that's probably when she actually fell in love. You know, when he was a cat. Putting that aside, one of Arthur's first acts as king is to ban eggs from the castle. But it's a little too late, as Lynn accidentally eats some cake. So now she's back in her world, but she just eats an egg to immediately come back. But it doesn't work, because the game disc is not in her computer. Even though it hasn't been in her computer since the first time she came back. How do the fucking eggs work? Anyway, Qíshì has the disc now, and Lynn tries to get it back with, well, slave labor. But she only actually gets it back after some generic school drama. It is so irrelevant to the larger plot, y'all. But she's got the disc back. There's a quick subplot about a jousting competition between Arthur's knights and some rude nobles, which I'm only mentioning for two reasons. One, Lin ends up having to joust and is doing very poorly because she doesn't know what the fuck she's doing, but ends up winning by standing up on her horse and delivering the blow that way. And I don't know a lot about jousting, but I'm pretty sure that's fucking dumb. 2. This one noble has some ostentatious armor, and an audience member says that he looks like an aboriginal. What the fuck? Also, original Chinese? Nothing of the sort. The next actually important thing that happens is that Arthur refuses to get engaged to Guinevere. Obviously an important step in his and Lin's romance, but it also poses an issue because part of Guinevere's dowry is the special wood that will make the round table eventually. The round table can't work its destiny shit without it, apparently. But there is another way. They can get a seed of the same kind of magical tree and make the round table from that. But it's trapped underneath an ice sea in, well, they say Berea, but if we go back to the original Chinese, they meant Siberia. Lin and Lancelot head off to Siberia to grab an acorn that's guarded by a siren. Oh, you brought a friend. And then they call the island that the siren lives on Odin Island. Going back to the original Chinese, Google suggests Siding Island? So, I'm less mythologically confused about that one, I guess. But where the fuck are we? Anyway, Duarte's also after the wood and arrives in Siberia at the same time as our heroes. You may note that it's awfully convenient that the two parties had the same plan and got to Siberia at the same time, especially considering neither of them are in any sort of time crunch. And normally you just sort of, ignore that because these things happen. It's a convenience of storytelling. But there is actually an explanation given later. Qi called Duarte Rodriguez, like with a cell phone, and told him where Lin was going. But we'll get there. Anyway, the siren shows up, but both that problem and the Duarte problem are solved by a spontaneous surprise fissure that swallows up Lin and Duarte.
Gabe and Rice from the edit here. I just realized that because they're going, as I said, they were going to the ice sea of Berea, which turned out to be Siberia. And after this, they end up underwater, as I will shortly tell you. So I just realized that probably that was the ice they were walking on cracking, not rock. I thought it was weird that I made that mistake, so I went and checked the art, and yeah, it was definitely rock in the art. So that's not on me, but that's probably what they were going for.
Underneath the rock is a magical ocean temple that houses the seed and shows visions of childhood trauma to all who enter. Like, it doesn't seem to be a test or anything, it just thinks it's funny. For example, Lin sees herself being left home alone some singular nights. So, typical kid stuff. Duarte sees himself being bullied and harassed by a bunch of noble kids until he snaps, taking out a knife and stabbing one of them. And then the rest of them? And then licking the blood off of the blade while laughing like a maniac. And then Lin, seeing both side by side, goes, yeah, these are about the same level of traumatic. And they have a weird, little bonding moment there. I don't know. Lynn's a true crime girl, I guess? I don't know what the fuck's going on. Anyway, when they find the seed, Duarte obviously tries to take it for himself, but he also tries to take Lynn with him too, and is not beating around the bush with his intentions, by the way. Lancelot steps in, is generically good, and the situation is resolved with them getting the seed. Merlin, in the span of just a couple of pages, plants the seed, grows it into a full tree, cuts it down, and makes the round table. And there's a weird destiny thing going on where everyone who will be one of Arthur's knights has a chair at the table with their name already on it, even if they haven't been recruited yet or are currently an enemy. Notably, the chairs have their original English names on them, so we can do a bit of verifying that these knights are who we think they are. We get direct confirmation that Kai is Kay and Terry is Tristan, and Parsifarchus is mentioned as having a chair, but we do not see the chair. So, I don't tend to really research the things I talk about. Like, I'll read a lot of manhua and novels and whatnot, and I'll Google things in there that don't make sense to me, but like, I won't research the author or their other works or where/when it was published or the larger genre at play. That's just not how I like interact with these things. However, I felt that I should, just in case, Google the author's name, at the very least, to see if there was anything that I should definitely talk about. Oh, here's a Wikipedia article. Wonderful. Wei Zhong is a Chinese-Swedish author who writes under the pseudonym Vivibert. Her stories include romance novels and time-traveling series for young adults, all published in Chinese. Okay, so this is part of a trend. To date, all 16 novels she wrote were believed to be found with various degrees of plagiarism. Okay. Let's do some research. So, according to her Wikipedia page, someone on a forum site made a post with a very sensationalized title accusing her of rampant plagiarism, including the detail that her writing kept inexplicably switching between simplified and traditional Chinese, which I don't know a lot about Chinese. I'm pretty sure that doesn't just fucking happen. Our very own Qíshì huànxiǎng Ye, or Fantasy Night as they refer to it, actually has a bit of a part to play here, as the original novel was apparently the very first book published after the accusations were made, and was also accused of being plagiarized itself. It also says she got the nickname Goddess of Plagiarism, and won what's basically a golden raspberry for plagiarism. But something's off. I don't quite have the vocabulary to describe it, but this does not sound like Wikipedia should. The entire article was definitely written to talk about the plagiarism, and basically every section talks about it to some degree, and the ones that don't are bare minimum. The article clearly does not like Vivibert, and will say some shit that certainly would not have survived peer review. Like, you cannot write a Wikipedia article like this. You can't say, admittedly she sold well, or include a detail just because you think it's funny, or imply that she lied about getting a bachelor's degree. That's not what the fucking site is for! Also, it refers to the controversy as one of the largest instances of plagiarism by a single person. I wasn't able to find good data about that. But that cannot possibly be true, even if all the accusations are true, right? Also, it kinda seems like no one outside of the internet gives a shit. Like, the response from publishers is clearly divided between websites and actual fucking companies. No legal actions have been taken, the article making an excuse for why that would be the case. And she continued publishing books? And yeah, it's difficult to, cancel someone, even someone who, should. But also, if this is definitely plagiarism, you feel like there'd be something that would happen. So, I did something that I should probably do more often. I checked the sources. Easier said than done, since all of them are from over a decade ago, and almost all of them are in Chinese, which, once again, I don't speak. Also, the vast majority of the sources require the Wayback Machine to look at, and a sizable portion of them don't even work then. So, anyway, the sites you can visit. Most of them are online forums and blogs, which, and I shouldn't have to say this, are not credible sources. It's like claiming, oh, so-and-so is a terrible person, and your proof is a podcast of some of your buddies shit-talking so-and-so. But there are actual news articles from actual publications. Bit of an issue. I don't know if they're reputable publications, or more specifically, were reputable at the time this happened. Maybe things can change in 10 years. But regardless, I don't know. I have no idea how to even try to figure that out. But it's probably not a good sign that they're basically only reporting on the forums and blog posts as their sources, which, as we mentioned, are not reputable. One of them then goes on to say that she has no talent and that anyone with common sense could clearly see that she must obviously be plagiarizing, despite, seemingly, not knowing anything about her or her work. And yeah, once again, I don't speak Chinese, so I am interpreting MTL. But I don't think even a really bad MTL would take a credible source and turn it into this. And one of them is in English. This article from The Local, a Swedish newspaper. She moved to Sweden to be with her husband. This one seems to be reporting specifically on what's being said in the Chinese media, which, if it's anything like what I was able to find, isn't a great sign. But it does have English comments which are just dogpiling on her. Like this one. Vivibert is the vilest living creature to ever hold the title author. She even copied what others wrote to remember those who died during the Sichuan earthquake. I hope her karma catches up with her, and soon. Also, there is a very certain toothbrush-mustached individual who also technically holds the title of author, so just on the face of it, no. Also, I tried to find sources that weren't her Wikipedia page or linked on her Wikipedia page, but all of the sources I could find, English or Chinese, were copy-pasted from her respective Wikipedia articles. A quick run-through of the rest. This non-functioning video I wouldn't be able to understand anyways. This picture of a physical newspaper that image recognition machine translation gets some of, and what it does get it seems to be more of the same. And one of the blogs purporting to have actual evidence of Viviber's plagiarism does still kind of work. And what can be made out does not look good for Viviber. I'm not saying she didn't plagiarize. I'm saying I was unable to find a credible, unbiased source. Notably, I've been talking about her English Wikipedia page. It's the exact same in Chinese, basically. But there is a third language. She also has a Wikipedia article in Japanese, and that one has no mentions of the plagiarism anywhere. It did at one point. It was made as just the same article again, initially. But there was a revision that removed all mentions of the plagiarism, and the comment on that revision referred to it as a hanging, lacking neutrality. So at the very least, I'm not alone in being skeptical. So, I'm not actually that well versed in Arthurian legend. So when the manhua started talking about Excalibur as being different from the sword in the stone, I thought it was full of shit. Until I Googled it. Always check yourself before you wreck yourself. Anyway, the reason Arthur needs to find Excalibur is kind of funny. Immediately after the round table is formed, Gawain marches up with an army and proposes to Lyn. Arthur refuses in her stead, tensions rise, and the two have a quick duel. Obviously, Arthur wins, making Gawain into one of his knights, but it's what happens after the duel that's important here. So, Arthur and Gawain have a sword fight. Everything's fine. Arthur puts his sword back into its scabbard. Everything's fine. They all share some comedic banter. Everything's not fine. Arthur suddenly goes, "Ah!" takes his sword out of his scabbard and holds it in his hands. And it is only then that the sword, while being calmly held, shatters into a million pieces. And that's why Arthur needs Excalibur. Also, Merlin makes a quick comment about how Excalibur means hard lightning. It doesn't, to be clear. Lyn and Arthur set off to find the lake that Excalibur is located in, but they only end up finding the lake itself because Lyn gets led there by a spiritual version of that dog that turned into a naked human boy, reappearing for the first time in 70 fucking chapters. Anyway, they meet the Lady of the Lake, and after a very brief test, they get Excalibur and its scabbard. The lady tells Arthur, if you have to choose between the sword and the scabbard, you should choose the scabbard. And Arthur goes, nah, fuck you. Eventually he loses it, and I'm genuinely unsure if that does anything other than setting up this oddly sexual line. Also, they reunite with Flower. You remember Flower, the lion that Lyn protected from the human face flies with a magical fly sweater whose activation chant was I hit, I hit, I hit, I hit. Remember that?
That was fucking weird.
Babe, wake up. New plant translation dropped. So after reuniting with Flower, Lyn gets a boo-boo on her hand, and Arthur goes, finds a local plant, and uses it as an opportunity to slobber on the back of her hand. We understand. But they give that local plant a name. They call it Phalaenopsis, which is a genus of orchid, and could conceivably be the plant depicted here. But I wanted to check. So, the original Chinese literally means butterfly grass or butterfly weed. There is a plant called butterfly weed, but it's called that in English, and the Chinese name is different. There is a plant that this basically Chinese Wikipedia tells me has that exact Chinese name, but it is very clearly not the plant depicted here. There is also a genus of plants that also has its exact Chinese name, and they look like they could be the flower depicted here. But really the bigger problem here is that butterfly grass is just a good name for a plant. So a lot of different people of a lot of different languages and cultures want to call a lot of very different plants butterfly grass. Also, that's just a very generic flower. So I don't know. Maybe Phalaenopsis is correct. This has been pointless. But we're not done. Because as Lynn and Arthur are about to leave, the Lady of the Lake turns to them and says, "Hey, tell Merlin to stop sending me Phalaenopsis." So the mystery butterfly grass makes another appearance? No. Going to the original Chinese, this is an entirely different plant with just completely different characters. She's actually talking about this. Pansies. There was no mystery or ambiguity in this one. She's talking about pansies. Also, it's gonna be plot relevant eventually that Merlin is sending the Lady of the Lake flowers, much to her chagrin. We'll get there. Back at the round table, we start setting the stage for Sir Galahad. Lynn notices a seat at the round table that doesn't have a name on it, but instead says, Danger's Seat. I believe with no apostrophe. Merlin explains that if any knight that doesn't have a heart nor a pure body tries to sit on it, they'll meet the danger. Then we're introduced to a new femboy chef called Qíshì, who I am mentioning for only two reasons. One, because he will be Galahad eventually, and two, Qíshì means quick hands. Also, Merlin says she'll know who that fucking dog is soon. Merlin is lying. Anyway, Arthur goes to war with the Saxons, and two things happen immediately. Lynn gets traumatized by all the bloodshed, and the leaders of the Saxon army are introduced via a very clunky exposition dump. These two are Nerdessa and his brother Camillo. Are they characters from Arthurian legend? I don't know. Their roles kinda map onto Hengist and Horsa, but the names are obviously completely different. Looking up Nerdessa's Chinese name goes nowhere, but looking up Camillo's name does actually return something from Arthurian legend. Fucking Camelot! Also, Nerdessa is immediately captured by Arthur off-screen, and the only one of the two we ever actually see is Camillo, who immediately captures Lynn to torture her for information that she doesn't actually have. Forgot my jacket. A little bit of information about Camillo. He wants to rescue his brother, and he thinks Lynn is a demon because, as we all know, demons love egg-based teleportation. It's in all the scripture. And, to be fair, that's still two more character traits than Lancelot, who's been here the entire... Anyway, Lynn quickly discovers that Duarte is actually in charge of the Saxons, and then escapes to her world with an egg. Is it a pun? Exit. Eggs. It. While she's there, she learns that in Arthurian legend, eventually, Arthur dies. Like, she doesn't even really get any details about it, like, you know, when or the circumstances of it. She just knows that eventually he's gonna die, which... yeah! Hey, Rez. Hello. I'm recording, Rice. Quiet. In that same book, she finds a drawing of that dog, signed by a mysterious Luo Lin. I will reiterate that we never learn what's up with the fucking dog. This is the last time it's ever mentioned. Luo Lin gets brought up again, but not the dog. Anyway, she goes back into the game and is shocked when Duarte bans the guards from giving her eggs, wondering how he knew about that. Girl, you asked Camillo for a chicken egg out of nowhere, and when he gave it to you, you immediately ate it and fucking disappeared. In front of him! Doesn't take much to connect those dots, sweetheart. Duarte tries to get Arthur to surrender by threatening Lynn, but Lynn escapes and Arthur wins the battle. Duarte seems almost pleased to be defeated, which is not really a surprise because he is very obviously in love with Lynn at this point. And no, I don't know how old Duarte is. I don't know how old any of the guys in love with Lynn are, except Arthur. Also, Parsi Farkas is here, reminding you of that guy's existence. He was hired by Duarte, but didn't seem to actually take part in any of the fighting. So, mood, I guess. And Lynn and Arthur actually start dating. I'm sure you are. I'm sure you were all on the edge of your seats regarding that. Shortly after that, Morgan and Mordred show up. Hey, I was wondering if those pricks were ever actually going to show their fucking faces here. So, Morgan is being a shady bitch as expected, convincing Arthur to let them stay in the castle. And to avoid having Arthur worry about Mordred as being a potential claimant to the throne, she has Mordred pretend to be mute. Or as the manhua puts it, dumb. Also, 2 more knights are introduced and recruited by Arthur off-screen, and then immediately go back to non-existence, only ever appearing on this single page. So, not actually relevant, but just keep it in the back of your mind that Bedivere and Percival are just hanging around in the background now. Who the fuck is Parsi Farkas? As it quickly turns out, though, the better question is, who the fuck is this guy? Because he's not Percival. This took a while. So, first of all, definitely not Percival. Parsi Farkas is definitely Percival. Eventually, the fan translators crack down on getting the names right, and they start calling him Percival, and in the story itself, he starts doing the things Percival does. He's a failed Grail Knight. Parsi Farkas is certainly Percival. So who's this guy? Well, let's go to his Chinese name. This is exactly the Chinese name of Perth, the capital of Western Australia. Looking into the history of that name was a dead end. Be calm. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up! But we note that the pronunciation of that last character can be softer, making the name sound more like purse. Perhaps explaining why the translators thought he was Percival. This is the same author that shortened Tristan to Triss, after all. I obviously don't know if this was the logic, but it seems a reasonable explanation. But of course, we know that's not what's happening here. So let's dig a little deeper. Googling his name only turns up Perth, so I wanted a list of Chinese names of Arthur's knights to, cross-reference. She comes in, screams a bit at me, and then wants out again. I don't know what to fucking tell you. Googling Arthurian legend in Chinese basically only turns up the translation of that specific phrase. But putting that into Google gets us the Chinese Wikipedia article, which links to the Wikipedia article for the Knight of the Round Tables. And then, hey, we got a list of Chinese names for the knights. And, drum roll please. That'll do. There are no matches. Seriously. The only name that contains this character is Percival. We know it's not him. And many names contain the second character, but not Percival. Because why the fuck would anything make sense? Now, I know there's never just one way to translate something. I know the translated names on Wikipedia could not possibly be the only possible translations of these names that exist. But I could not find any other translations. Well, except for in Qíshì huànxiǎng夜. Pick one. With some further Googling, it turns out that there is a character in Arthurian legend with that exact Chinese name. Lady Perse, lover of Sir Hector. And you know what? I kind of like that interpretation. Definitely was not the author's intent, though. It is at this point in my research that I give up and go to Reddit. I made a post on r/translators and got a response surprisingly quickly. Shout out to ZS Ethereal, who has a very simple theory. This unidentified individual is Sir Bors. You can see how this kinda makes sense, as the p and b sounds are very similar. I feel the need to note that Chinese does have a b sound and draws a distinction between the b and p sounds, and that such a b sound is used in the Wikipedia translation of Sir Bors. But it's a reasonable mutation to have happen somewhere in this godforsaken process. Maybe you find that a little unsatisfying, though. Fair enough. So let me tell you something I found out much later. You will remember that on this day I told you that these knights only appeared on this single page. It is now that I tell you that on this day I have lied to you. Near the very end of the entire fucking story, there is a moment where some of Arthur's knights attack Lynn and the rest. We'll get there. Obviously, none of the main knights we've gotten to actually know can fill out this antagonistic role, so we gotta get one of the sideliners pulled in. And riding in on no steed at all, it's not drawn, is the capital of Western Australia. The fan translators have already started calling Parsifarcus Percival. They cannot call him Percival. And what do they fucking call him? Bozy. More like Bozadi's nut. But yeah, this guy is Boars. This will never be relevant. But what about Camillo? Well, he died as he lived. Off screen. In fact, the whole damn war with the Saxons ended off screen in this giant exposition dump, including details about the war, Lynn and Arthur getting closer, something about Arthur's men getting caught in a malaria trap? Whatever the fuck that's supposed to mean. Also, I have no idea what happens in Odessa. They just sort of forgot about it. Instead, the manhua is far more concerned about giving us the detailed play-by-play of Guinevere and Morgan, who are working together for some fucking reason, being catty bitches to Lynn and trying to frame her for some petty drama. Also, for attempted murder, but mostly the drama. To be clear, literally nobody believes them, and Merlin immediately resolves the situation by plucking out his eyeball. So it's a complete non-issue. And now Guinevere shoots Lynn with a gun. We don't know it was her yet, but it was. Anyway, Lynn is injured from this event, and Merlin prescribes that she eat an egg and stay in her world for about 3 months. First of all, that works. What the fuck is up with these eggs? And second of all, we really have just completely dropped the idea that time flows differently between these two worlds, or that instruction makes no fucking sense. While Lynn is in her world, she discovers that Arthurian legend no longer exists, and no one remembers King Arthur. That or her friend is gaslighting her. Linling, what are you talking about? Never in history was there a guy named King Arthur. Did all the learning in school make you confused? What the fuck? So then Lynn goes back into the game early and discovers that Arthur and the rest of England don't remember her. But everyone else does. Duarte whisks her away to Rome, depicted here as Gotham City for some fucking reason, and tries to convince her to flip to his side. Oh my god, the intrigue! The mystique! Such a compelling mystery with so many unanswered questions. What could possibly be the... They'd never explain any of this. This major status quo shakeup that informs the central conflict of the ending of this entire series just sort of happens without explanation. There's technically an explanation you could apply to it later, but it comes with its own share of plot holes and also boils down to God did it? We'll get there. Anyway, Parsifal betrays Duarte and saves Lynn by giving her an egg. And there's a weird thing that happens here where Lynn is seemingly only concerned with Parsifal's survival because he will eventually be one of Arthur's knights. Our protagonist, everybody. Also in this vein, one of the previous times Lynn was back in her own world, she heard news that one of her classmates was fucking hospitalized, and she went out with her friend to find a get well present for her. While attempting to do so, she is reminded of Arthur and just ditches her friend running to go eat an egg. The hospitalized classmate is never mentioned again. Then Lynn's mother breaks the game disc, so she goes to Qi1 to see if his weird connection to the game means he can fix it. The thing I mentioned earlier about Qi1 calling Duarte and telling him what Lynn's up to gets formally revealed. and their explanation on how this is possible.
Perhaps the electrons originated from these dimensions.
What the fuck are you on about? Even if that made sense, it's been pretty damn consistent that time is paused in Lynn's world when she's in the game. How the fuck are you holding a conversation? Also, obviously Duarte didn't have his own phone, so he's been using Lynn's phone that she accidentally dropped in front of him like 50 chapters ago, which I think means that that phone has held a charge for half a fucking year? Anyway, Qi can fix the disc, but he warns the cost will be Arthur and the rest of England forgetting Lynn entirely. I didn't skip any steps here. That already fucking happened. No! This is a complete non-issue, but Lynn goes and is angsty in the rain for a bit anyway, and has to be told by Merlin in a dream to go back and save Arthur before she actually decides to do so. So, one day, I randomly became curious about the actual physical comics in the original Chinese, and wondered how much it would cost to purchase them. With the idea that if they were cheap, I'd get them, because, why not? Long story short, I found it quickly, but I faced a billion roadblocks in figuring out what shipping would cost. And at some point, the mindset switched to, God himself cannot stop me from purchasing these items. So, 6 months, $100, and one heart attack later, I finally have 24 books I can't fucking read. I should have never been given financial independence. But one thing I noticed immediately was that the title on the cover has an English translation right there. Knight's Fantastic Knight, which sounds much more like an actual title than Knight Fantasy Knight, which is what the translators use. So that was a neat little thing to find. But then, if we just open one of these random books and look at the character introduction page, it has a previously on section, and it says previously on Knight Fantasies Knight. And it's on all of these. That the front page says Knight's Fantastic Knight, but the previously on section says Knight Fantasies Knight. And actually, that should say previously on. I don't know why it doesn't. Consistent, inconsistent, official translations of the goddamn title. If you don't find that deeply fascinating, I don't know how you made it this far into the video. And the reason Merlin contacted her in a dream was because Arthur got poisoned, off-screen, by a cape that he knew was poisoned. Boy's not the brightest. So Lynn needs to go find a mythical snow fairy who can give her the cure to Arthur's poison. On the way, she encounters a beaten-down Duarte who informs her that, while she was gone, Rome lost the war. Why is everything happening off-screen? Duarte follows her to find the snow fairy, which they immediately accomplish because we've got 15 chapters left and we need to pick up the fucking pace. Also, the snow fairy's deal is that in exchange for what a person wants, they will take that person's most precious thing in like a metaphorical sense. And Lynn is making this deal, so we ask the question, what is Lynn's most precious thing? Could it be her memories of Arthur, setting up a dual memory loss arc? Or how about her courage that she gained at the very start of the series? Well... The snow fairy looks at Lynn. A high school girl who never asked for any of this. A high school girl who spent her life a timid wreck unable to stand up to her mother, who played a computer game one day in a moment of innocent defiance. A high school girl that was thrust against her will into more and more dangerous situations without any real way to opt out. A high school girl that was thrust against her will into a situation that would crush any normal person. A high school girl that stopped running away and learned to stand up for herself and others. A high school girl that has gained strength, physical, mental, and spiritual along the way. A high school girl that became a Duke of England and is a feared symbol in Rome. A high school girl that fell in love with and had that love returned by King Goddamn Arthur. The Snow Fairy looks at Lynn and decides that her most precious thing is her youth. But that's an entirely separate conversation. Then she spends half a month traveling to Camelot, easily sneaking into the castle and Arthur's personal chamber to heal him. After doing so, Arthur immediately remembers her for some fucking reason, and Lynn tries to eat an egg to leave before he can see her get old, which doesn't work. Also for some fucking reason. It's never explained. Then Duarte shows up, and Lynn willingly goes with him, once again to avoid having Arthur realize her predicament. And the entire time that Arthur's trying to stop them, he's still calling her stupid woman. Like, the way their relationship is, I know that's a term of endearment, but this is not the time, buddy. Some other oddities. If you look at their spines while lined up, you might notice that there are actually two different fonts here. If you compare the sh character from here to the sh character from here, you'll see that they're clearly, obviously different. What may take a little longer to notice, though, is that there's actually 3 fonts. Volume 17 and Volume 17 alone has yet another font distinct from the other 2. Duarte takes her to his private castle, confesses his love to her, and, when rejected, casts a spell to make her forget everything. He lies that she is his fiancée and makes it clear that he will still love her and keep her by his side, even when she becomes an old lady. Speaking of, they talk like she's going to get older and older as time passes, but like 3 months pass, and the only thing that happens is the thing that immediately happened, which is her hair became silver. And I don't mean like it becomes an unhealthy white and is like dry and all that. Like, it is a very healthy silver. It looks fucking good, honestly. It looks better than how she normally looks. Looking even closer, we'll notice that the text on the top and bottom of the spines also changes font, but this time, Volume 17 does not have its own font, despite still being the switchover point. And the bottom text completely changes style, but not font, for the last 4 volumes. Obviously, Arthur shows up to get Lynn back, and Duarte creates a bridge made from multiple blades to test him, which, fun fact, is a thing Lancelot did in actual Arthurian legends. As he's crossing and getting more and more wounded, Lynn finds herself crying over the actions of this apparent stranger risking everything for her, eventually breaking Duarte's spell. As her memories of the man she loves come back, she begs him not to come any closer, to not endanger his life any further. He smiles, calls her stupid woman again, and continues his march. In the pouring rain, they embrace, both having sacrificed for the other, and both chastise the other for the act, in a climactic, and everything's blue, for a couple of pages. Not sure how that happens. Anyway, Lynn and Arthur have remembered each other and reconciled, but obviously Lynn needs to get her youth back. So how does that happen? Well, it turns out that Duarte actually went back to the Snow Fairy and got Lynn's youth, probably planning to use it once she had accepted him. but he freely gives it to them now. Duarte informs them that he gave up his ambition in exchange, and that is how he is written out of the series.
Oh! So the guy...
So Arthur takes Lynn back, makes her a duchess again, and announces their engagement again. I will remind you, well, not remind because I didn't tell you the first time, that this was something very difficult to do before the memory wipe. And now none of them know who she is. So I don't know how he did that. Also, the femboy chef slayed a dragon off screen and is now Sir Galahad, already sent to go find the Holy Grail. Or Cup, as they're currently calling it. Arthur leaves the castle to go put down a Welsh rebellion that just popped up off screen. While he's gone, Morgan calls Lynn over to her room. As a quick note, Lynn's already pretty sure that Morgan's evil and doesn't really trust her. So Lynn enters the room, discovers that all the lights are off, and that the room is empty except for a very suspicious-looking mirror. So she touches the mirror. Doesn't actually do anything other than show that Morgan is actually a villain, though, and Morgan sort of appears from a dark corner and just says that anyway, including her entire motivation and a full confession of every evil thing she's ever done. And she reveals that her goal is to put her son on the throne, which he doesn't have a claim to. He is not a direct descendant of a king of England. Copy rear page on all of them. Then she uses some magic to turn Lynn into a mute harpy, ties her up, and gets all the knights and guards present to try to burn her at the stake. While she is being held in a cage awaiting execution, Mordred sneaks in with the antidote and gives it to Lynn. He reveals that he's not actually mute and confronts his mother about how he doesn't even want to become the King of England. This would be a powerful moment, seriously developing Mordred as a character. If he was one. Yeah. You may have noticed that I haven't actually mentioned him since his introduction. That wasn't just me. In the 25 chapters between his introduction and now, he has not been mentioned or even drawn a single fucking time. Except this one piece of dialogue that never is followed up on. Also, this entire thing is just sort of immediately dropped, with Mordred just sort of following Morgan's plan without any fuss for the rest of the series. Lynn is about to be burnt at the stake when Lancelot comes running back from the Welsh front to save her. But this too was Morgan's plan, as she tells Arthur that the two eloped. In reality, this isn't too far off. Lancelot ends up remembering Lynn for no reason and almost confesses to her before she stops him. Lancelot simply swears to always protect her. Arthur, upset by this, orders his men to take back Lynn and to kill Lancelot if he resists. Well, no problem, right? I mean, why the fuck would they resist? Right? Like, the knights show up, they say, hey, you two eloped, and they go, what the fuck, no? They go back, explain the situation, and there's no problem whatsoever, right? Except Lancelot doesn't trust any of the knights now and refuses to let Lynn go back to where Morgan is against her wishes. And then fucking Bosie shows up with a bunch of other knights, escalates the situation, and Lynn and Lancelot have to run away. At which point they run into Sir Burley Elias, a very minor character that Lynn helped way back at the start of the series. I didn't mention it because it really wasn't interesting and is only important now. Back then he was some random unimportant knight, but now he's the Crown Prince of France. So Lynn and Lancelot seek asylum in France, which prompts Arthur to declare war on France, leaving Camelot open for Morgan and Mordred's rebellion. In just a few pages, we are already at the Battle of Camlan, with Arthur and Mordred facing off while referring to being mute as dumb some more. Lynn quickly hears about this and spends a few days getting there from France, but when she does, the battle is already over. Basically everyone is dead, including Arthur and Mordred, striking each other down literally the moment she arrives. And that is the last we ever see of Mordred. They stab each other, fall down next to each other, the camera zooms out, and he should be right there. But they just didn't draw him. That guy's getting fucked over. He didn't deserve this. Every book has a 2-page spread of just some random art at the front of the book. Just a neat little extra for buying the physical book. Lots of different types of comics do it. However, volumes 10, 11, and 19 alone have this just be the cover art again. And 8 and 13 have the same art, except 8 has "Thank you for your support" in English along the top. Anyway, Arthur dies in Lynn's arms. She screams to the heavens and wakes up in her bed. Qi1 is also there, in her room. She asks about what if her parents find out, and Qi1 ominously responds, "They won't." Lynn asks him to send her back to the game world no matter what. He says the game has ended. She wants to go back even if she has to start over from scratch. And then Qi1 says, "I'm an alien!" My father, also an alien, is a genius scientist specializing in game design. My brother, that Luo Lin guy, and I came to Earth and made a video game based on Arthurian legend because Earth stories are popular on my planet, I guess. That's the fucking lore, I guess. Luo Lin, or rather Merlin, fell in love with the Lady of the Lake. You remember the bitch that turned you into a frog? Accidentally cursed her, and now gets turned to stone at the end of every iteration. Despite countless playthroughs, nobody ever cleared the game, so I decided to make another game linked up to the first, where a timid, cowardly girl becomes brave in the process of completing the game. That's right, we're second matrixing this bitch! You, your personality, and your entire reality were all created by me. Also, I fell in love with you, maybe not longer on that one. And even if you go back and save Arthur, both games will end, you as you are will cease to exist, and I'll have to play through the entire game with 66 other characters before I can get back to you, all of whom will live your life with your parents and your friends before you have a chance to fucking exist again. But yeah, I can send you back. And it just does that. Proving the eggs were never a necessary component. What the fuck is going on? So Lynn finds herself in the cave where Percival and Galahad are looking for the Holy Grail, and Galahad explains that he's sure the Grail is there, but he just can't find it. Lynn suggests that maybe some lines from the Bible might help. Galahad starts quoting some completely arbitrary quote, has nothing to do with a Grail or anything, but it mentions blood. So Galahad comes to the conclusion that the Grail needs the blood of the perfect knight, and kills himself. The Grail immediately revives him, but somebody should get that kid a therapist. The Grail is absorbed into Lin, and she immediately runs over to the battlefield and revives everyone, completing the game. And it is here, in the last 3 chapters, that we see why we did the whole double matrix alien game designer thing. Because now we can wrap things up with a neat and tidy happy ending, because now Merlin and that popular guy from school are God. And they can just sort of do whatever. Namely, Merlin decides to stop the endless repetition of the Arthurian legend game and starts transferring those characters into the modern day game. He brings himself over as a new teacher, and he brings the Lady of the Lake, whom he's trying to seduce over, as a first year. You didn't have to do that, though. And then says that transferring the other characters will take a very long time, maybe 10 years. And he has no clue when that will happen. A year passes and Lin graduates from high school. Merlin arranges a graduation trip to England, and there's a royal procession passing through. Lin gets into some trouble, but riding in on a white horse to save her is Arthur. Somehow still a part of the English royal family. And that's the end. We never hear anything about the others. I suspect Lin doesn't actually care about them. So that's the end. All of our subplots have ended, all of our loose threads have been tied up, and all of our questions have been answered. Well, except for, what were the villain's plans? Like, Morgan wanted to make Mordred king, but why would helping Guinevere marry Arthur help that along at all? She says she wanted to separate Lin from Arthur, but that doesn't explain why she supported Guinevere after everyone forgot about Lin. Also, what was Duarte actually trying to accomplish when he fought against Arthur in England? Also, what did he want the seed for? Like, he stops doing things after losing his ambitions. Was he just generically trying to conquer a lot of territory? What the fuck was his deal? Why did Mordred get such a rough fucking deal? Like he's a fucking child who clearly and explicitly is just doing things to get his mother's approval. Like this is your fucking Zuko character. You just sort of killed him and forgot about him. What the fuck's wrong with you? Speaking of immediately forgotten, Morgan kickstarts the rebellion and just sort of fucking disappears. The story just fucking forgets about her at that point. As best I can tell, her only comeuppance is just not being brought into the new game worlds at the end of the story, which, again, very few characters we actually confirmed got to that universe. Morgan got basically the exact same ending as fucking Lancelot, which is just stupid. Not to harp on the point too much, but what was up with that damn dog? And why was it a ghost the second time we saw it? Finally, imagine that you're Qi-1 making the second game. You're basically God. You can do whatever you want. And specifically, you can make the trigger to go between the game worlds literally any